How many of you are familiar with, aside from the topic today, have been familiar with the character Daredevil? Anyone? Okay, good amount of people, because there was like 4 in our practice service earlier. So how many of you remember or have seen the 2003 film Daredevil starring Ben Affleck? Anybody? All right. Okay, it was rated 5.3 on IMDb. I didn't remember it being that bad, and then I watched the trailer again, and I was like, that was awful. That was like a bad church skit, okay? And so it was really bad. How many of you have watched any of the Netflix series that's been going on? Anyone? Yeah, that's really good. I'm near the end of season 1, and it's rated an 8.7 out of 10 on IMDb, which is really crazy high. The 4th most popular show on Netflix, but it just got canceled, and I think it has to do with Disney having the rights and blah, blah, blah. They're getting ready to start some channel for stuff just like that. So anyways, here's kind of the story from the comic book back in the 1960s when Daredevil was first introduced. So it starts off, there's a kid whose name is Matt Murdock, and his mother passed away when he was very young, so he's being raised by his father, who's a single father, and his father's raising him in Hell's Kitchen, which is a neighborhood in Manhattan, New York City. And so his father is a boxer named Battling Jack Murdock. And his father is always telling Matt, the main character, man, I want you to study. I want you to do well in school. I don't want you to have to get punched upside the head like I do to put food on the table. So make something of yourself. And so he's always pushing his kid to study. Well, Matt becomes a bookworm, a good student. And because of that, he's kind of made fun of at school. He's picked on, and eventually, secretly, he decides he needs to train himself to fight. He doesn't want his father to know, he doesn't want to upset his father, but to deal with the bullies at school, he begins to train himself to fight. Well, one day, young Matt Murdock is walking down the street, and he sees a blind man who's about to get hit by a truck, and heroically, he springs into action. He jumps in front of the truck, shoves the blind man out of the way, but this truck is carrying hazardous chemicals that spill directly into Matt's eyes when it swerves to the side and all that. And so Matt is blinded by these hazardous chemicals. But wait, do not fear, my friend, because I left out a very important word, and that is the word radioactive. These chemicals are radio. Now, in our world, that wouldn't be good news at all, would it? But in the 1960s mind of Stan Lee, plus the word radioactive, that's an awesome thing. If you are in the Marvel universe and you see a radioactive spider, you run toward it, right? Okay? It's going to change your life for the good. You're not like newspaper, ew! No, you run toward it and beg it to bite you, all right? And so, basically, Matt Murdock, our young hero, has a strange thing happen. He goes blind, but his remaining senses are heightened because of this radioactive fluid, these chemicals. And his other senses are kind of elevated to superhuman accuracy. So now, his sense of smell, for instance, he can detect even the faintest odor in the room. Now, for moms, that's not a good thing. For people who are married to a man, that's not a good thing. You don't want your sense of smell heightened for anything in the room. But basically, he might be like, for instance, in season 1 of the TV show, he's in an apartment in Manhattan, in Hell's Kitchen, and there's a person a couple floors down going door to door, knocking on doors, questioning people, and he knows it's an enemy, but he basically, because he can hear what they're saying, but he also smells them coming. And he says, there's some guy going door to door, and he likes his aftershave a little bit too much. And he's like, okay, we need to get prepared. This guy coming's a bad guy. And that's because of the heightened sense of smell. Also his hearing. His hearing becomes so acute that he can hear heartbeats. So when he's interrogating someone, he will listen, and based on the change in heart rate, he'll be like, all right, he lied to me on that one question. Why did he lie to me about that one question? So it's suddenly, his hearing is like a polygraph that he can detect heart rates as he has conversations with people. He also has sense of touch. Now it's so advanced, he can read printed materials with his fingertips. For instance, like a newspaper. Explain that to the young person next to you, what a newspaper is. But a newspaper, he can rub his fingers across it if it has raised ink. His sense of touch is so heightened that he can touch colors and sense what the colors are because his sense of touch is so acute. So he can touch them and be like, that's periwinkle. That's really advanced. When you can detect periwinkle, very, very advanced. Well, then he also has a radar sense. And this is what really takes place of his sight. It is not sight, but he has this radar sense now that compensates for his blindness. He can detect outlines and shapes and locations of objects around him. And although it is not sight, it actually has a couple benefits over sight. And that is, one of them is he can kind of sense, this radar sense kind of goes through fabric, but also through walls. So if he's near a wall, you couldn't see through that wall, but you could sense who is on the other side of that wall and objects on the other side of that wall. And the other advantage it has is that it's omnidirectional. So a regular field of vision, two eyes, you see what's in front of you, and peripherally, but this is omnidirectional, 360 up and down. He can sense with this radar what is all around him in every direction. Well, now later, Matt goes on and he studies law with his friend Foggy Nelson, who's his best buddy. They both get law degrees, and they start a practice together called Nelson and Murdoch. But Matt was never satisfied with the crooked justice system. I don't know if any of you are podcast listeners, but Serial Season 3 would be an example of this. It was done here, the justice system in Cleveland, as an example of the justice system in all of the states. And basically just like, this is what Matt struggles with. He's like, man, the injustice in the courtroom, I can't stand it. He eventually adopts the identity of Daredevil to begin his own crusade against injustice during the night as a vigilante. So during the day, he's a lawyer in the courts, but he doesn't feel like the job's getting done, and people are crooked, and they're owned by evil people who are paying him off. So in the night, he goes out as a vigilante to fight for justice. Now, the thing I'll admit to you with Daredevil is this. Whenever Daredevil is depicted outside of a comic book, in the 2003 movie, in the Netflix series, which is really good, when I'm watching that, I have to admit that my imagination falls short when I'm trying to envision this superhero, a person who's been made blind, having these incredible hand-to-hand combat fights, just whipping butt. There are times where it's 12 enemies. He's in a hallway of an apartment, and people are coming in and out of doors, and he's just jacking them in the jaw. He's hardcore parkour, stepping on the wall, flipping, punching people. They're throwing blows at him. He's dodging, ducking. It's constant bobbing and weaving and dodging and ducking and avoiding and evading and parrying and punching. And I have to admit, my imagination falls a little bit short when I'm like, but he lost his sense of sight. That is so quick. The stuff he's doing, it's faster than even me. The way he's taking out these enemies, he is just wrecking people, and it's crazy, and my imagination falls short. And I try to envision a hero who can't even see, even with the radar and all that kind of stuff. I'm just like, man, it's really hard for my imagination to fully get there and to believe it. I want to. But so many times, I really kind of overthink these fight scenes, and I get lost in these battles where he's fighting enemies he cannot see, but somehow he's victorious. I get stuck there. Turn to 2 Kings 6, and we'll come back to Daredevil. So page 295, let me give you some background. God has made a partnership with Israel. Israel is now a nation, okay? He's made a partnership with them, and he's using his relationship with Israel to be a blessing to all nations. This is his way to reach all nations, is through the nation of Israel. And often God raises up prophets to lead them spiritually. Not just any preacher, not just any preacher like me, but a person that God would speak directly to give them instructions for the entire nation. Well, in 2 Kings 6, the current prophet is Elisha with a S-H in the middle. And so Elisha, sometimes in Scripture, is called Elisha. Other times, they'll just refer to him as the man of God. So they went to where the man of God was, and that's Elisha. So in this situation, this is a super interesting story because there's a nation called Aram who is at war with Israel. They basically keep coming into and raiding into Israel's territory, doing raids and then disappearing. And so they just keep coming in and doing this. Well, the king of Aram will do something like this. He'd say, okay, he'll tell his commanders, I want you guys to set up a camp for our army in this such and such an area. And the idea is, it sounds like he wants to set up camp somewhere in Israel's territory and ambush Israel's army when they come through. So he'd say, okay, set up camp in this area. And when he sets up that location for the ambush, God will directly tell Elisha what's going on with the ambush. Elisha, as an advisor to the king of Israel, will tell the king of Israel, and the king of Israel will be like, for real? Like in that exact place for realsies? Okay, I'm going to send some spies off. They go check, and they're like, it's just like the man of God said. There's people there waiting. If our army would have come through that valley, they would have wrecked us from above. And so this happens time and time again that God warns Elisha, Elisha warns the king, and they escape being jumped in their own territory. So finally the king of Aram is seeing red. He's losing his religion over this. He is so ticked off. He's so mad. And so basically this is what happens. He calls all of his commanders into a room, and he's like, commanders, come in. I just woke 2 people up. He goes, come in here. And so his commanders all come in, they gather around. He's like, which one of you is giving intel to the king of Israel? Which one of you is the mole? Which one of you is the spy? Who's doing it? And one of the commanders raised their hands like, your majesty, it's none of us. It's this man of God they have. Like this guy, Elisha, this prophet, it's like God's telling him all of our secrets and letting them off the hook every time that we could ambush him. And he says, it's this bad. Now, this is crazy. He says, King, it's this bad. This prophet even knows the very words you speak in your bedroom. Okay, that just got real. Okay, now listen to me. I'm a man before I'm a preacher, okay? So understand, this just is a representation of that's the most sensitive place in your life. This is the most guarded place, the most secret. I mean, so like, wait a minute. This king is like, what? I have a harem. I mean, he knows what I say in my bedroom, everything. Okay, this guy, suddenly Elisha is public enemy number 1. And this guy's like, I want this prophet. Find out where he is. So that's where we pick up 2 Kings 6, verse 13. Go find out where he is, the king ordered, so I can send men and capture him. The report came back, he's in Dothan. So then the king sent horses and chariots. Now, this is a very important phrase. He sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city of Dothan. When the servant of the man of God, so that's the servant of Elisha, when the servant of the man of the God got up and went out early the next morning, he's got a momentum cup of coffee, he's got a momentum cup, and he's out there just sipping. He looks out, and an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh no, my Lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. And then, don't be afraid, the prophet Elisha answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Now, pause right there. That's weird because the servant is sipping on his coffee. He sees all these horses and chariot soldiers. And he's like, there's nobody with us. Like, you're just a prophet. You're not the king. You don't have a bodyguard. You ain't got it like that, man. Like, there's nobody protecting you. That doesn't make any sense. And then Elijah prayed, open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and he saw the hills full of horses and chariots, of fire, all around Elisha. As the enemies came down toward him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, strike this army with blindness. So he struck them with blindness as Elijah had asked. Elisha told them, he says to the Aram armies, this is not the road and this is not the city. Star Wars fans, what is he saying to them? These are not the droids you're looking for, okay? That's what he's saying to them. This is not the road. They're all like, what just happened? We've been blinded. This is not the road. This is not the city. Follow me and I will lead you to the man that you are looking for. And he led them to Samaria, a totally different place. He takes them to Samaria. Now let me just summarize the ending of the story. There he asks God to restore the enemy's sight. He feeds them. He doesn't just feed them. He provides a feast for them. And he sends them home, sparing their lives. And here's the result. Aram no longer invades Israel. It stops completely. They're like, they had intel on the king's bedroom. They blinded us. Then They took us to another city. We found the droids that we were looking for. He gave us our sight back. He gave us a feast. Why did he feed us instead of cutting our throats? And then he sent us home. We're staying home. Okay? The enemy had intel on us from the bedroom to the battlefield. Like, dang. Okay, so the point is these soldiers of Aram mounted up with horses and chariots. They show up, they surround Dothan, they surround Elisha, the man of God, and it looked to them like they were in a position of dominance, but they didn't see, they didn't sense that there was an invisible enemy there. They didn't get that at all. In fact, the horses and chariots that they had were being checked by horses and chariots of fire, which is really the angelic armies of the living God. And they're there all around them, but they didn't sense it. They didn't know. We don't know if they ever know in the story that that's the case. And what happens is they don't realize this whole time this invisible army, this invisible enemy, has been collecting intel on them from the bedroom to the battlefield. And that's what they missed completely. Now, it works both ways, and here's what I mean by that. Later, centuries later, there's a Christian leader named Paul. Sometimes people call him the Apostle Paul or Saint Paul. But Paul, he writes to followers of Jesus, Christians, in a city called Ephesus, and it's recorded in a letter in the New Testament of Scripture called Ephesians. And so he writes this to Christians: take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the powers of this dark world and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Now, if you gave up on church years ago and maybe you're new coming back to church or whatever your story might be, and trust me, I understand so many of those stories, but sometimes it's because of stuff like this where maybe you were a part of a church where they mistook that the enemy was people that they could see. Okay? The enemy's flesh and blood. Oh, man, the enemy is the people on the other side of the political aisle from us. Okay, it's those idiots over there, and then the people over here. No, it's those idiots over there. It's flesh and blood. And what Paul's saying, no, it's not flesh and blood. That's not your enemy. It's not the pornographers in California. It's not people who work at abortion clinics. It's not the drug dealers downtown or in Garfield Heights or in Macedonia. It's none of them. Those are not the enemies. The enemies, it's a spiritual enemy. Spiritual forces. And so Paul is telling the Ephesian Christians, don't make the same mistake as the army of Aram did. Like, to be unaware of the enemy simply because you can't see them. Okay? You got to know when you're getting into things that are otherworldly. Don't miss that there's a spirit world that interacts constantly with our physical world. And in this case, he's talking about Satan and other fallen angels, which we call demons. In fact, later in Scripture, Paul says this: we, talking about his own team right here, we are not unaware of Satan's schemes. Like he's plotting, he's scheming against us. Satan is not all-knowing, he's not omniscient, but he's collecting intel, especially on people who are seeking or following Jesus. He's collecting intel. He wants to know your weakness from the bedroom to the battlefield, and he's collecting intel on you. And so our battle, our fight isn't against flesh and blood. Your eyes can't perceive the true enemies. The enemy is made up of spiritual forces in this dark world. Otherwise, you have to learn how to fight an enemy that you can't see, but if you will try, you can perceive. And so you're in a battle that just might seem like, man, I don't know if my imagination can get me there. I don't know if I can really picture that happen. Is that the case? And Paul's saying, man, don't make the same mistake. Like, make sure that you realize there's a spirit world, and it is constantly interacting with the physical world. And it all comes down to you and your relationship with Jesus being pulled closer to it or being pulled further away from it. It all comes down to being between you and Jesus. Now, I'm going to be a nerd for a few minutes, and a couple of you are going to love this. Most of you are going to hate it. But I'm going to get nerdy, and I just want to explain to you, the human senses were only designed by God to be so good. I mean, they're limited. I mean, I'm sure most of you can admit that freely. Like, yep, God designed our senses to be limited. I mean, when you think about the human eyes, for example, human ears, all that. Let's take the human ears, for example. The human ear can't hear every sound that's immediately around you. It can't. Your ears can't detect all the sounds that are immediately around you. Have you ever been sitting in your living room and all of a sudden your dog perks up? Huh? Sometimes he's not just being an idiot, okay? Sometimes he can hear things that your ear was not designed by God to hear. He hears pitches that are higher than what your ear can hear, and so your ears just weren't designed to be that good. For instance, elephants make infrasonic calls that can be heard. They're so loud they can be heard for miles, but you could stand right next to the elephant and not hear it at all. It's too low for your ear to hear. God designed your ear to not hear that. You got a spectrum, it's not within that spectrum. So your ear is limited. The human nose, it can detect over 1 trillion different odors. That is incredible. Over 1 trillion distinct odors. But most animals' sense of smell are far superior to what we can smell. In fact, scientists say that humans have 5 to 6 million odor detecting cells, 5 to 6 million. But a dog has 220 million odor detecting cells. That's a lot of smell cells, okay? And I noticed this week, like, I'm new to having a dog. Last couple of years, we got a dog named Sullivan. He's a boxer mix. Staff meeting Monday morning, 8:15 in our living room at our house here in Garfield Heights. People file in. We put Sullivan away in a room. He gets in there. He barks. He goes nuts. He hates men. He hates men with beards. He hates men with hats. He hates men who are standing. So we put him in the room, and he stays there. Rah, rah, rah. He barks for 20 minutes, and we talk over him as a staff. But then when staff meeting's done, we'll let him out, and it's fascinating to me. He comes out when they're all gone. We don't let him out before they leave. He comes out, they're all gone. He knows where everyone has been after Mo group, after staff meeting. He sniffs around, and he'll go off. One person went to the garbage can. People don't usually go to the garbage can during staff meeting, but the one time they do, he follows the trail. And he follows the trail. He knew someone went to the garbage can. He goes to each seat. He skips seats where no one sat during that staff meeting. Like, he knew someone didn't sit there today, skipped over. He's like, and there's Bobby, the student guy. I don't like him or his butt. Then you just go around and sniff around. You're like, it is absolutely fascinating, but our noses just weren't made to be that good. And in some ways, I just say, praise the Lord, okay? So then there's the naked human eye. I mean, it's not designed or equipped to detect everything that's in this room even. I mean, get your mind around that. The things that we can see size-wise are called macroscopic. Things we can't see size-wise are called microscopic. You can see them if you got a microscope, but the naked human eye can't see those things. And it doesn't matter how hard you strain, you just can't see cells and molecules and atoms. Keep trying. You aren't going to see them. And then things smaller than an atom, subatomic particles, neutrons, protons, electrons. I mean, it's amazing. There are microorganisms, that you can't see, things that are alive. Most bacteria are microscopic. I think that's creepy that just most are. There's some bacteria you can see. If you have a middle school child, maybe you know this or whatever. But there's some bacteria you can see. But did you know there are also animals that are microscopic? They're animals. That's so crazy. I mean, like arthropods, for instance, which are invertebrate animals like dust mites and spider mites. There are microscopic crustaceans. That is nasty. Okay? Like a mini lobster running around on your neck or whatever. So weird. There's rotifers, which are microscopic aquatic animals. I mean, this is so crazy. In fact, some of these microscopic animals even produce sexually. Like the stuff you learn from science is just crazy. Let's just give one, for example, the yellow mite. Check out the yellow mite. That's your boy right there. That's the big chungus, okay? That's your boy, okay? This is commonly found on Florida citrus. All right, so you might find it on an orange peel, and you might peel a Florida orange and get one on your finger, and you're eating those peels, and you get a yellow mite. You don't even know it because this animal is microscopic. It's nasty. And right now, you got that itch sensation in the back of your neck and in your scalp. It starts feeling itchy right now because you can't. Your human eye was not designed to see that. It's microscopic. One other thing is it's not just based on size. There are things in this room you can't see because they aren't in your light spectrum. So the light spectrum generally, historically, is known as Roy G. Biv. This is not a vocalist from Belle Biv DeVoe in the 90s. That's not, okay? So Roy G. Biv are, representative of colors. Now, this is just your spectrum, though, okay? There are things on each side of the spectrum that you cannot see. What does the R in Roy G. Biv stand for? Red, okay? On the other side of red is infrared. You can't see infrared. That's outside your spectrum. What's the V stand for? Violet. Well, on this side, there's ultraviolet. You can't see ultraviolet, although it's very harmful. Make sure you put plenty on your nose to protect yourself from ultraviolet rays when you're sunscreening. Okay, so that's your spectrum right there. There are things outside of those that you cannot see that are in this room even. I mean, it goes on, the things that you can't see, like radio waves, microwaves, X-rays, then gamma rays, which brings us back to the Marvel Universe. Banner becomes the Hawk because of gamma rays, okay? And I mean, even if you think about all the weirdos here that were like, I want to see more sexy pictures of the yellow mite. You look it up on your phone, we can't see the Wi-Fi signals, the cell phones. We can't see any of that stuff, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There are all these things in this room right now that your eyes were not designed to detect. And before you complain about it, your hardware that God gave you, you can see about 10 million different colors. It's unbelievable. That's more than me. I'm a little bit limited. I've got red-green deficiency up here. So a bunch of those are knocked out. Let's guesstimate 8 million for me. But most of you, 10 million. So invisible just means it's not visible. Your human eye can't perceive it. Maybe it's hidden to your human eye. But that doesn't mean it's not there. And to that end, God designed human senses to be limited. He didn't create them to sense the spirit world, the spirit realm that exists around us all the time. Your eye can't see it, your ear can't hear it, your fingertips can't touch it. That doesn't mean it's not there. It means that God has created you with limited senses. You were not meant to detect the spirit world with your senses. And so God didn't design the eye, the tongue, the nose, the fingertips, any of that stuff to detect spiritual realities. That doesn't mean the spirit world is not there, though. It means we have to be more creative to detect it, to find the evidences for the spirit world. Hebrews 11:1 says, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Meaning it's a reality, but you don't see it. When Stan Lee first released in the 1960s the character Daredevil, he was really worried that it might be offensive to people who didn't have the sense of sight, whether they lost it or whether, they were born not being able to see. And he was really worried, but when he released it, he said he had overwhelming feedback. People who didn't have sight, who were like, man, we love this character you created. Like the way he doesn't have sight, but his other senses fictionally are heightened. We love that because it's kind of like you gave us a superhero. And people ended up loving it. But I understand his feeling of like, man, I don't want to offend. I don't want to come across as insensitive. But I would say this with that same trepidation is spiritual blindness is a much bigger problem than physical blindness. Meaning it's more widespread and it's a bigger deal. To say, man, I don't perceive, think about, notice, try to detect a spirit realm at all. Whether it's God or whether it's his angels, whether it's darkness and spiritual beings that are battling for my soul to pull me away from Jesus, whatever it is, I just don't detect it. So it's really difficult to fight enemies that you cannot see, but if you would try, you could detect them. You just have to work getting your imagination to do the work to understand how to detect that. Let me give you a couple tips on that. The first tip I would say is just this. Pray for your spiritual eyes to be open. I mean, just a simple prayer that you can begin praying. And in a few moments, you can say, man, I think it would be great if the man of God, Elisha, could just stand here and be like, man, Lord, open their eyes, me included. Like, just give them a glimpse to see with spiritual eyes, to hear with spiritual ears what's going on around us right now. It would absolutely change our lives. It would also eliminate faith. Like just to take that all away and to give us the evidence. Because faith is hope in what we do not see. And so that would be the easy route. But to say, God, would you open my spiritual eyes to see spiritually, to understand, to perceive what I can't see? And here's what I'd ask you to do. Pray this for yourself first, then for others. So pray first for yourself. God, open my eyes to the unseen enemy that I'm just constantly in battle with. But honestly, I'm taking shots if I'm not defending myself or fighting back at all. And ask God, God, why am I having so much trouble forgiving in this situation? Like, I don't struggle with that usually, but right now, I'm tempted to let bitterness take control and just write this off and be like, just forget it. So why right now, God? Give me spiritual eyes to see. Open my eyes to understand why. Why, God, am I jealous right now? I'm usually not jealous about this kind of thing, but her being proposed to, him getting a promotion. Why now, God? Give me spiritual eyes to see. Why do I feel so insecure right now? What is it that's going on that I'm starting to do stupid things because of my insecurity? God, give me spiritual eyes to see. Why am I so afraid of doing the right thing right now? Usually I think I'm pretty good at wanting to gravitate toward or to know what's right. But right now, God, give me spiritual eyes to see why I want to do something stupid. Give me spiritual eyes to see. Then pray for others. It's like put on your seatbelt first, then, oxygen mask, put that on first, help the person next to you. Then pray for your spouse. First, have spiritual eyes to see what they're battling through before you say, God, really, I want to pray for my spouse who isn't interested in Jesus at all, who seems very hardened toward something that's happened to them in the church in the past or whatever. Pray for them and say, I want to pray for him or her, but help them have spiritual eyes to see what's going on. Or I pray that my teenagers' eyes, their spiritual eyes will be open because they're distancing themselves from me right now. He or she, I want them to see the spiritual battle that's going on. Or my friend who's heading into some really dangerous territory right now, I just pray that you will give him or her spiritual eyes to see. The second thing is to train yourself to become more mindful of the spirit world in general. Like, it takes some imagination. It takes mental work and spiritual work to say, I got to train myself to do this, all right? To be more conscious of, more aware of, more alert to, more sensible of the spirit world. And I think we say this a lot in sermons, but it's just the truth. One of the best things for this is a daily diet of Scripture. If you read Scripture every day, you get this reminder in the morning, if that's when you read, man, this world isn't all there is. I needed a reminder of that today when I'm walking into this meeting, when I'm dealing with the issues in my household. I needed that reminder. And so the more you have a daily diet, it's up to you how much you read every day, but to have a daily diet, it gets your mind on things eternal, not just temporary. Some of the selected passages that helped me when I first became a Christian, these are some of these. You don't have to memorize them by heart, but I would try to learn the basic story to have it in your index for times when you need it. Here's the one we covered earlier with Aram and Elisha and the people being blinded and the chariots and horses of fire. Ephesians 6, we covered that. Daniel 10 is fascinating. If you don't understand it, message me and I'll give you a little explanation. But Daniel 10 is fascinating about the spirit world. 2 Corinthians 10, another really cool passage. And so just kind of get those in your index. I know one thing that helps me, I have a couple things I'm reluctant to share this morning because I fear they might come across as hokey, but I'm sharing this one anyways. That's when I first became a Christian. I was 15. I grew up in a totally unchurched home. But when I became a Christian at 15, I read a fictional book by a guy named Frank Peretti, and it's called This Present Darkness. It's a phrase taken out of Ephesians 6. And I read it, and it really was good for me to open my mind to the idea of how the spirit world interacts with the physical world. And so I read it, and it's a plot, basically, where there's something going on in this small town, and there's a small church in this small town, and there are issues and problems popping up in the community, but it doesn't just describe what's going on in the physical realm. It describes the angels and demons and the spiritual forces and how they interact with the problems in the town and the issues in the church. And it was just good for me to read that. Now, some people criticize Frank Peretti because he labeled certain temptations to specific demons, like here's a demon of lust, here's a demon of envy, here's a demon of gossip. And so some Christians were like, well, the Bible doesn't say it's a demon of gossip. But the point was, he was trying to alert us to this is a spirit world. This is how it interacts with the physical realm. I remember there was like this situation in the book where there was like a church meeting. And people filed into this old church building, old wooden pews. They filed in, and the meeting was about how to respond to what's going on in the community. What's the church's role? And there would be some people in that church who had selfish motives. And the things that they wanted the church to do were all based on their selfish gain and motives. And so when those people stood up and spoke up during the meeting, caused strife and confusion and division, you would see some demons come into the room that he would describe. They're like warrior-type demons. They've got like, blood veins rippling out of their biceps, stuff tied around their bicep like the ultimate warrior from professional wrestling. And they'd come in and they got their swords, and they'd walk in, stand somewhere on the stage, one in the back corner, and just start sizing up the room while people are creating strife. Well, then some people would see that, and they'd respond, and they'd say, man, this is not good what's happening right now. And they'd start to pray silently in their chairs. Say this, old guy in the back and a young lady up front. They'd start praying for God to intervene, send his angels. And then angels would walk into the room. And you'd see this big ripped angel walk into the back of the room. And he'd step inside. And he'd look up at the demon who's on stage. He'd give him like a, up, And you'd be like, okay, I can feel the tension. But how God is sending resources to come show up because someone was wise enough to pray. And that was so good for me to see that and to bring that to life in my mind. Because I was like, man, there's so many times we're talking about topics at Momentum, to people at Momentum, sensitive topics, to people who have their own unique backstory and history, where I'm like, man, I hope someone right now is praying. Like, I hope someone in this room feels what's going on and prays. And it's kind of creepy because it also kind of alerts you and reminds you of the fact that there are things in this world that our eyes can't see and our ears weren't designed to hear. They're happening in this room right now. Things that you can't see. Now, at the 9 o'clock service, that's a little earlier, and I don't know if demons are up yet. And so, they're out, they were gaming till late at night. They're a little hungover, so they sleep in. So I don't know, but this service, certainly the demons are awake by now. And so just like, okay, there's stuff going on that I can't see or perceive. I need to engage in this spiritual battle. Another thing that I read that I refer to often is C.S. Lewis's book, The Screwtape Letters. This is... You've heard the saying, sorry, not sorry. Well, this is the genre I would describe as fiction, not fiction. Because it's fictional, the characters in it are, it's an uncle demon, an experienced tempter, who's writing letters to his inexperienced, tempting nephew demon. So it's Screwtape writing letters to his nephew Wormwood. So they're fictional, but the stuff in it didn't describe demons and biceps and swords and physical battles happening in the spiritual world. I guess that would be spiritual battles happening in the spiritual world. Didn't describe all that. So when I read it in high school, I was like, well, this is really boring and lame. And I just read just letters from a fake demon to another fake demon. This is really lame. Then I read it 10 years later, and I was like, this is incredible. This is so insightful and spiritually helpful. It is just so good, and you've got to get your mind thinking in the ways of the spirit realm. I've got to train my mind to think like that and to understand what's happening. And the last one is this. Then you have to take another step, and this is a big step, to train yourself to detect spiritual battles, not just during sermons, not just during prayers, but in everyday life. To say, okay, when I'm out at work, when I'm talking to my spouse about a sensitive, whatever it is in everyday life, I have to learn that. Here's the other story. I was a little bit like, this comes across as hokey, but it's just the truth. And that is, I remember the first time I realized in everyday life that I needed to turn my mind onto this. I was standing in a department store in a mall, and I was standing in front of a rack of clothes, and I had this really nice pair of jeans. Now, backstory, my parents didn't buy me nice clothes when I was young. I wore Pro Sprint tennis shoes. Heard of those? No, okay? Because the place that sold them doesn't exist anymore. Hills, or whatever. Just like, these are generic plastic pleather tennis shoes that when I ran in them, they cracked right here. And so my shoes were always cracked. The plastic was. I wore cheap clothes. Now I had a job and I was balling working at McDonald's. I wasn't just flipping burgers. I was a crew trainer, people. That's like another 10 cents an hour. And so I'm standing with I'm standing with my paycheck, and I'm like, I got the money to buy clothes that my mom wouldn't buy me. I got it like that. I can do this, okay? Here we go. And so I'm looking at these jeans, and I'm about to blow my whole check on some jeans, and I'm like, well, why do I want to do that? I mean, the truth is, because I'm in high school, and I'm like, I want people who wear nice clothes and come from pretty neighborhoods to think maybe I'm from the same neighborhood as them, and maybe they'd even date someone from that neighborhood or that wears nice jeans like I'm wearing. And I just start realizing, this is really stupid. I'm doing this to impress other people. I'm going to blow my whole check for a pair of jeans. And then I got to save up another check so I have 2 nice pairs of jeans. And it isn't anything if I bought these jeans I was going to go to hell over, but it was the subtlety that my mind was conforming toward. It's all about this. It's all about physical stuff. And I was able to realize in this moment, man, I'm being tempted, and it's a small, stupid thing, but I got to pay attention to the battle I'm fighting right now. 2 Corinthians 4:18 says, we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. You know, for you, it might be back to this issue of saying, man, I'm having trouble letting this situation go. I'm having trouble forgiving this person right now. Just to say this to yourself in everyday situations, how am I fighting an invisible enemy right now that I can't see, but I can't perceive? How is this a battle, a spiritual battle right now? For you, it might be, man, I'm clamming up every time I have an opportunity to have a spiritual conversation with someone. Sometimes they're bringing up spiritual stuff, but I'm clamming up. I'm not talking anything about what God's doing in my life. I'm not mentioning anything about my friendship, my spiritual friendships with people in my Mo group. I'm just clamming up every time. Ask myself, why would that be a victory for the invisible enemy that I'm battling with, that I cannot see, but if I try, I can perceive? You know, to say, I don't want to go to Mo group right now because someone said something that hurt my feelings, or they didn't say something that hurt my feelings, or I walked in on Sunday morning and I think someone purposely didn't say hi. I've been a pastor long enough to have gotten so many emails and messages and text messages from someone who gives up on Mo group, gives up on momentum, gives up on church, gives up on God because someone didn't say hi to them. Oh my gosh. And to say in that moment, to be spiritually mature enough to say, how would this be a huge win for the enemy if I don't go back to Mo group? If I don't go back to church because one person said something insensitive, because one person didn't say hi and I think they saw me, how would that be a huge win in your everyday life against you for the unseen enemy? Man, you have to train yourself to battle an enemy that is unseen, but you can perceive him if you just train your mind to see that in everyday life. We want to move you forward to love God, love people, and make disciples who make disciples by learning how to do that. Let me close with this. There's an interesting comic book plot that pops up in the nerddom of Marvel Universe, which I love, but it is nerddom, okay? And so there's a storyline that pops up called Secret Wars, and there's a sequel to it. This is going to blow your mind. It's called Secret Wars 2, all right? So Secret Wars, there's I guess we'll call it a character. There's a character that's really a cosmic entity, all right? His name is the Beyonder. He's unseen. He's invisible. In fact, he's described at that time in the Marvel Universe as the most powerful being in the Marvel Universe. He's almost omnipotent. In fact, he creates a planet at one point. He's a creator. And then there's this interesting plot that happens in Secret Wars 2 is this Beyonder character decides he wants to come to Earth, and guess what he does? He comes as a man. He comes to Earth, he shows up at Earth, and guess what he does? He crosses paths with Daredevil, and he heals Daredevil's blindness. This is a fascinating plot, okay? He shows up, creator, almost omnipotent. He shows up, he comes to Earth as a man, and he goes around and he heals a blind person. And Daredevil begins to struggle because he's like, I haven't seen in so long. Am I going to compromise my character and my calling now to protect my sight? Like, I'm trying to fight against injustice, And what if now I start to just defend my ability to see? What if this compromises me as a hero? And so Daredevil, Matt Murdock, really starts to struggle with this. I haven't seen so long. What if my sight becomes an idol to me? I don't know what to do. And so basically, Daredevil insists, he demands that the Beyonder take away his sight again. And the Beyonder reluctantly agrees and blesses him with blindness. Now, Jesus, the Creator, comes to earth as a person, and he goes around and he heals the blind and the sick and the tormented. But one of the interesting things Jesus says is this. He says, the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. Now, what he's saying as he's healing people of their physical blindness is he's saying there's two things here, a double meaning. I will restore physical sight to some people. But what also is going to happen is my teachings and my miracles will help some people to spiritually see, to open their eyes, to see what's happening. But in those same crowds, you'll look next to you blown away at what Jesus just taught, and you'll see a religious leader next to you who is clearly spiritually blind. They don't get what's happening. And so Jesus says, my teachings will also bring out who in the crowd is spiritually blind. But there are some things that are worse than physical blindness, as Daredevil shows us in that scene, and it's spiritual blindness. And Jesus says, my teaching will expose people to seeing, and it'll expose the people who can't see spiritually because they just choose not to. And Jesus often closed his sermons in the way that I want to close mine. Sometimes he would teach, he'd tell a story, give a point, and he would just simply say this to the crowd. He who has ears, let them hear. And that's how I just want to end, is just to say, he who has spiritual eyes, who will train themselves to see spiritually. He who has spiritual ears to hear, let them hear. Let's pray.